At 17 minutes past 6 on a blazing August evening, in the dust-gold light of the Walters Cattle Ranch outside Silver Creek, Montana, the joke finally slipped out of a man who almost never joked. "I'll tell you the truth," Thomas Walters said, leaning his sun-browned forearms on the top rail of the corral. "If I were a younger man, I'd have asked you out 3 weeks ago." He was 54 years old, broad through the shoulders, a widower who had not said a foolish thing out loud since the Reagan administration, and the instant the words left him, he wished he could pull them back into his mouth. The new veterinarian did not even look up from the 2,000-pound bull whose swollen leg she was working. "Who said no?" "Doctor," Claire Bennett replied. She was 32 years old, and her voice was absolutely level, and her hands never once paused in their careful, unhurried work. For one suspended moment, the entire corral went silent. The 2 ranch hands stopped coiling their stiff ropes. A single fat horsefly droned in the shimmering heat. And Thomas Walters, who had not blushed in 3 decades, felt an unfamiliar warmth climb the back of his weathered neck. Well, he managed. "All right, then. That's usually how it works," Claire said, and pressed her thumb gently into the tendon above the bull's hock. "Hold still, Sergeant. Almost done." What none of them standing in that dusty corral understood, not Thomas, not his sharp-eyed old mother watching from the porch. Not the whole skeptical county that had spent 6 weeks writing this woman off as too young, too polished, too city-bred to be trusted with a sick steer, was that the quiet doctor kneeling in the manure and the dust was the very same surgeon who had written the diagnostic protocol their beloved old veterinarian had been botching, expensively, for the better part of 30 years. The joke was not the beginning of the story. The joke was very nearly the end of it. 6 weeks earlier, on the first sweltering morning of July, Claire Bennett had driven her dented 10-year-old pickup into Silver Creek with everything she owned lashed under a green tarp in the bed and a worn leather medical bag on the passenger seat. The bag had belonged to her mentor, old Dr. Raymond Sullivan of Ithaca, New York, who had passed away the previous autumn after 41 years of practice. Inside it, wrapped in a soft chamois cloth, was his brass-belled stethoscope, cool and heavy as a promise. She had carried that stethoscope through Cornell, through a celebrated surgical residency, through 9 bright and brutal years she was now trying very hard to leave behind. She had come to Montana to be nobody. The town seemed absolutely determined to help her. The valley was gorgeous and unforgiving in equal measure, a wide green bowl of irrigated hayfields shimmering under a merciless sun, the Gallatin Range rising blue and jagged to the east, the smell of cut alfalfa and warm dust hanging thick in air that buzzed and ticked with grasshoppers. Silver Creek itself was a single main street of sun-bleached brick, 1 diner, 1 feed store, 1 hardware store, and a veterinary clinic that had belonged to Dr. Gerald Foster for 31 years. Gerald Foster was 61 years old, silver-haired, and expensively dressed for a country vet. He did not shake Claire's hand so much as inspect it. "Small hands," he observed, turning her palm as though she were livestock. "You'll want gloves for the calvings, if I let you near a calving." "I've delivered a few," Claire said. "Back east." He smiled a frozen, patronizing smile and released her hand. "It's different out here, Doctor. The books you studied and the mud I've stood in are 2 separate countries. You'll want to watch, listen, and try not to embarrass either of us." "I'm good at watching," she said mildly. "Good, do that." He gestured at the back room. "You'll take the small animals. Vaccinations, barn cats. The Hendricks boys beagle. I keep the herds and the accounts. There's been sickness up the North Road," Claire said. "Cattle going off their feed. I heard 3 ranches, maybe 4. Foster's smile did not move a muscle. You've been here 40 minutes, and you've already heard a great deal. People talk at the diner. People at the diner also believe in weather ghosts and a bull that predicts the World Series. He picked a thread from his sleeve. It's a parasite year, Doctor. Nothing your fancy textbooks would recognize. Leave the herds to me. The town took its cue from him. At the diner they called her the Girl Vet. Ranchers who had trusted Gerald Foster for 30 years did not want a young woman from back east with soft hands standing in their barns at 2 a.m. You even old enough to be doing this, honey? One rancher's wife asked her, not unkindly, over the counter. I'm 32, Claire said. Older than I look. It's the sunscreen. The woman laughed despite herself. A man down the counter did not. Your husband know you're driving these back roads alone? He asked. No husband to know, Claire said, and paid for her coffee, and left before the burn behind her eyes could reach her face. The only soul in Silver Creek who treated her like a person that first week was a lanky, freckled ranch hand named Danny Reyes, 23 years old, who worked the Walters place, ran feed deliveries to half the ranches in the county, and cleaned stalls at the clinic on weekends for extra money. On Claire's third morning, he found her eating a sandwich alone on the clinic's back step and sat down beside her without being asked. You're the new doctor, he said. The real one, I mean. Not old Foster. Claire raised an eyebrow. Careful. He signs your check. He signs it slow. Danny grinned, then went earnest and pink. I want to do what you do. Someday I've read every animal book in the county library. Twice, Foster says a stall boy's got no business with a textbook. He picked at the laces of his boot. I don't care what he says. I think it's the finest thing in the world, a person who can walk into a barn full of scared animals and fix what's wrong. I think it's about the finest thing there is. Claire looked at him for a long moment. It is, she said quietly. Don't let anybody tell you it isn't. She never forgot that conversation. Neither, in the end, did he. The sickness in the valley got worse. By the second week of July, 4 ranches on the North Road had reported cattle going off their feed, staggering, dropping weight. Their coats gone dull and rough as burlap. Gerald Foster made his stately rounds in his big clean truck, diagnosed a stubborn parasite load and a mineral deficiency, and sold each rancher a small fortune in injectable treatments and a proprietary supplement that he and only he happened to stock. $11,000, Sam Hendricks told Claire at the feed store, his hat crushed in his hands. 11,000, and I've buried 3 head anyhow. Foster says give the shots time. How long has he been saying that? Claire asked. 3 weeks. And are they getting better? Hendricks looked at his boots. No, ma'am, they are not. Claire had begun keeping a small blue notebook. In it, in her precise hand, she recorded every case she heard about secondhand, the symptoms, the ages, the pastures, and most of all the feed. A pattern was rising off those pages that made the back of her neck prickle because it did not look like parasites at all. It looked like something coming in through the feed bunk. But she was the girl vet, and no one had asked her. Then, on the 19th of July, at 4 p.m, the crisis walked up to her own door. The Walters Ranch, the oldest and largest spread in the valley, 240 head strong, had its first animal go down. And it was not just any animal. It was Thomas Walters's prize bull, a champion Angus named Sargent, worth more than Claire's truck, her savings, and everything under her green tarp combined. Gerald Foster was 2 counties over at a cattleman's luncheon and would not answer his cellular telephone. Claire was the only veterinarian within 80 miles. Danny drove her out himself, gravel hammering the undercarriage, dust boiling gold behind them, and when she stepped out into the furnace of that corral, she found 4 grim men. One massive bull groaning on its side in the churned dirt, and an old woman on the porch watching her with eyes that had seen 82 years of storms. "I called Foster 4 times, Thomas Walters said flatly. He did not offer his hand. I want Foster. "Foster's in another county eating prime rib," Claire said. "I'm what you've got. May I look?" "That's a champion bloodline down in the dirt. Doctor, 20 years of breeding. This is no place to learn on the job." "I'm not learning," she said, and something in her absolute, unhurried steadiness made the big rancher step back and let her pass. She knelt in the manure and the dust. She uncoiled Dr. Sullivan's brass-belled stethoscope, warm now from the drive, and listened. She lifted the bull's lip and pressed the pale gum until the color crept back. She checked the eyes, the breath, the swollen left hind leg the men thought had simply gone lame. "It's not the leg," she said after 4 minutes, sitting back on her heels. "The leg's a symptom. This animal's being poisoned." Slowly, systemically, the foreman scoffed. Poisoned? By who? Not by who. By what? Claire nodded at the feed bunk 30 feet away. "And unless I'm very wrong, the source is right over there." "That's the same feed I put in front of 200 head, Thomas said. "I know," Claire said quietly. "That's what worries me." "Now hold on, Thomas." The old woman's voice came off the porch like a dry creek bed. "Shut your mouth and let the doctor doctor." And so, for the next 3 hours, in the falling gold light, Claire Bennett went to work. She flushed the animal's system. She cooled it with hose water until the men's boots were black with mud. She wrapped the leg and coaxed water into the bull a syringe at a time, and never once raised her voice or lost the calm certainty in her hands. Cicadas roared in the cottonwoods. Sweat ran down her spine. The foreman fetched her a chair, and she did not sit in it. By full dark, under a sky exploding with more stars than Claire had ever seen back east, the great bull heaved himself up onto his feet, swayed, and stood. The foreman took off his hat. Danny Reyes was grinning so hard his face hurt. And Thomas Walters looked at the young woman wiping her hands on a rag by the light of a truck's headlamps as though he were seeing her, actually seeing her, for the very first time. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say when you switched feed suppliers," Claire answered. She was not looking at him. She was at the bunk, a fistful of pellets in her palm, holding them up to the headlamp. "And who told you to?" "This spring." "New outfit. Cordell feed and supply. Cheaper than the old one." Thomas frowned. "Foster vouched for it himself. Said the mineral mix was better." Claire slipped a handful of the pellets into a plastic bag and folded it into the pocket of her jeans, and said nothing more. It was a secret that would change absolutely everything, and she was the only person in the valley who yet suspected it. Dr. Margaret Walters had come down off the porch, leaning on a cane, her white hair loose in the warm night wind. "You'll stay for supper. That's not a question." Inside, the old matriarch set down a pan of peach cobbler still bubbling from the oven and a sweating pitcher of cold lemonade with mint from her own garden. The kitchen smelled of butter and cinnamon and wood smoke. She watched the young doctor eat with the frank, unembarrassed interest of a woman far too old to waste time on manners. "Those are surgeons' hands," Margaret said abruptly. Claire's fork paused over her cobbler. "They're just hands." "I buried a husband who was a surgeon. Girl, I know the breed. Fast, and still, and sure." The old woman leaned forward. So what are surgeons' hands doing out here in the dust, doctoring bulls for a fraud like Gerald Foster? You think he's a fraud. I've thought it for years. Nobody listens to an old woman on a porch. Margaret's dark eyes did not blink. You didn't answer me. Claire looked down at the melting ice cream. I'm just a country vet now, Mrs. Walters. The old woman patted her wrist with one gnarled hand. Everybody in the twilight of a long life is running from something, child. The only question worth asking is whether you're running from it or running towards something better. She sat back. Eat your cobbler. You're too thin to be arguing with me. Claire did not answer, but she thought about that sentence for a very long time. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, Gerald Foster called Claire into his office and shut the door with a soft, deliberate click. Word of the Walters bull had already crossed the county on the wind. You had a busy evening, he said pleasantly. The bull's stable. It'll recover. So I hear. Congratulations, he steepled his fingers. Now, I want you to stop asking questions about the feed. Claire said nothing. The mineral situation in this valley is well in hand, Foster went on, his voice low and warm and reasonable. It has been in hand for 31 years. Your theories are the product of inexperience and, frankly, a certain need to be seen. It's understandable. You're young. 4 ranches are losing cattle, Claire said. Sam Hendricks is out $11,000. Sam Hendricks is a poor manager. Foster opened a drawer and slid a check across the polished desk. $12,000. A settling-in bonus. I'm generous with people who understand the shape of things. Some doctors are simply better suited to the small, quiet cases. He tapped the check. Take it. Take the quiet. Claire looked at the check for a long moment. Then she stood. Thank you for your time, she said with perfect courtesy, and left the check lying exactly where it was. She had refused a great deal more money than that, once, from people far more powerful than Gerald Foster, and she was not about to start selling the truth now. What the old veterinarian did not know, as he watched her walk out, was that he had just made the single greatest mistake of his 31-year career. Because that afternoon, Claire drove her own pellets to the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at the State University in Bozeman. An hour east through heat that made the highway ripple like water. She did not sign Gerald Foster's clinic name on the intake form. She signed her own. The young lab technician read the name, glanced up, glanced down, and went slightly pale. Excuse me, is this the Dr. C. Bennett, the one who wrote the forage toxicology screening protocol? He pointed a shaking finger at a laminated sheet on the wall behind him. That one. That's the standard. We run it every single day. Could you keep that to yourself for a little while? Claire asked gently. Just a few weeks. The young man swallowed. Doctor, it would be my absolute honor. Meanwhile, in his clean office back in Silver Creek, Gerald Foster was entirely convinced the girl vet had gotten the message. He poured himself a bourbon at 4 p.m. and telephoned Wade Cordell of Cordell Feed and Supply. It's handled, Foster said, chuckling into the receiver. The East Coast problem. She left the money on the desk, but she'll fall in line. They always fall in line. He swirled the ice. Send the next lot on schedule. Neither man had any idea that a plastic bag of their pellets was already sitting in a laboratory refrigerator 60 miles away, waiting to tell the truth about them both. The results came back 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, in an electronic mail message Claire read 4 times, standing in the clinic parking lot with her heart hammering against her ribs. The pellets were contaminated with a toxic weed, a species of ragwort, milled directly into the feed at a concentration high enough to slowly poison an entire herd. This was not a parasite. It had never been a parasite. Every rancher in the North Valley had been billed thousands of dollars to treat a disease they did not have. And the contamination was far too uniform, too consistent across every bag to be any accident. She called Danny that afternoon and told him to meet her at the clinic's back step. "I need help," she said. "Real help, the kind that could get you fired." Danny sat down beside her. "You had me at help. I need a clean sample from every fresh Cordell bag you touch on your rounds. Dated, labeled, ranch by ranch." She held his eyes. "This isn't a rumor, Danny. This is somebody poisoning this whole valley for money. If I'm right, it's a crime. If I'm wrong, I've slandered the most respected man in the county, and we both end up run out of town." Danny didn't hesitate. "Which bags do you want first?" Over the next 2 weeks, the hottest, driest stretch of the entire Montana summer. With heat lightning flickering along the mountains every night, Claire and Danny built a case the way you build a stone wall, one heavy piece at a time. Danny, who delivered feed for half the ranches in the county, quietly saved a sample from every fresh Cordell bag he touched. Claire ran them all in the dark hours after the clinic closed. "Every bag from 1 mill lot's contaminated," she told him, spreading printouts across the exam table under the buzzing fluorescent light. "Every single one. And look, the bags from before the spring supplier switch are clean as spring water." "So it started when they started," Danny said slowly. "It started when they started." Then Danny found the thing that turned a tragedy into a crime. Cleaning the clinic office one Saturday, emptying Gerald Foster's own wastebasket, he pulled out a crumpled quarterly statement and smoothed it flat on his knee. He read it twice. Then he drove straight to the clinic and put it in Claire's hand without a word. She read the line he'd circled. Then she read it again. 22%, she said. Gerald Foster owns 22% of Cordell Feed and Supply. He didn't get fooled by cheap feed, Danny breathed. He sold it to his own people. On purpose. And then billed them to cure a disease he knew they didn't have. Claire sat back against the seat of her truck, the crumpled statement in the white-knuckled grip of both hands, and the full staggering scope of it settled over her like a cold shadow on a hot day. Every dollar comes back to him twice, the poison and the cure. But even then, she did not yet know the worst of it. Danny learned it 2 days later, delivering feed with his ears open, and what he told her that night made her go cold all over in the July heat. "The ragwort wasn't an accident at the mill," he said low, standing in the dark by her truck. "I talked to a kid who works the loader. That weed got cut off a condemned field, a whole quarter section nobody's allowed to sell hay off. They milled it in on purpose, to move cheap tonnage they couldn't legally move any other way." "And the safety certificate," Claire said. "Someone certified that lot clean." Danny nodded slowly. Foster signed it. Foster himself, in exchange for his cut. Claire closed her eyes. "Then he knew," she said. "From the very first sick calf up the North Road, he knew exactly what was wrong. And he let his neighbor's herds fail rather than lose his money." "You could go to the sheriff right now," Danny said. "I could." Claire opened her eyes and looked out at the dark valley, the heat lightning walking the ridgeline. "But I'm a doctor, Danny, not a prosecutor. These people trusted that man for 30 years. If the girl vet marches into the sheriff's office with a folder, half the county will say I made it up to steal his practice. They won't believe it unless they see it. All of them. At the same time. With their own eyes. So how do you do that?" Claire thought of 200 families in one field. "The Gallatin County Summer Livestock Exhibition," she said. 11 days from now. The whole valley in one place. She folded the statement into her notebook. I've got 11 days to build something no one can deny. Those 11 days nearly finished her. She barely slept. She treated every sick animal she could reach for free, going ranch to ranch in the punishing heat, the truck's vents blowing hot air, the seat baking through her jeans. She switched herds off the poisoned feed, one skeptical rancher at a time. Clean hay, she told Sam Hendricks, standing in his barn at dawn. Cold water. Pull every bag of that Cordell feed and don't burn it. I need it. No shots. No supplement. Foster says the supplement's the only thing keeping them alive. Foster's the reason they're sick, Claire said. Give me 4 days. If your cattle aren't better in 4 days, you can tell the whole diner I'm a liar, and I'll buy the coffee. Hendricks studied her a long moment. 4 days, he said. On the 5th day, he telephoned her before 6 in the morning. They're up, he said, his voice thick. They're eating. My God, doctor, they're eating. He paused. What do I owe you? Nothing, Claire said. Just come to the exhibition. And bring your neighbors. Word began to travel, not the town's word, the rancher's word, whispered over fences at dusk. The Hendricks cattle were recovering. The Olson herd had turned the corner. Old man Pruitt's heifers were on their feet. The girl vet had done it with clean hay and cold water, and no $10,000 invoice, and folks were starting, quietly, to wonder. And in the long golden evenings, exhausted past speaking, Claire kept ending up at the Walters Ranch. Thomas would find her leaning on the corral rail, watching the sun melt into the mountains, and he would bring her a glass of his mother's lemonade, sweating cold in the heat. You look like something the barn cat dragged in, he told her one evening. Charming. She took the glass. Is that how you talk to all the women leaning on your fence? You're the only one who ever has. He leaned on the rail beside her, a careful arm's length away. There's been nobody at this fence in 6 years, not since my wife passed. He turned the words over, slowly, like stones. House has felt like somebody left all the lights off ever since. Claire was quiet a moment. I had a mentor, she said. Dr. Sullivan. He made me everything I am. When he passed last fall, the whole glittering career I'd built, the awards, the papers, the big city hospital, it all just went gray. Meant nothing. So I put his stethoscope in a bag and I drove west to disappear. Didn't work, Thomas said. The disappearing. No, Claire said, and almost smiled. It really didn't. The crickets sawed. Heat lightning flickered pink along the ridgeline. Thomas Walters listened the way few men know how to listen, and one evening, with the alfalfa sweet on the air, he said roughly that she was the most remarkable person who had ever leaned on his fence, and then, embarrassed, covered it with the joke about being younger. Who said no? She'd answered. And something in the old rancher's chest turned over like soil in spring. But the joke would have to keep. There was a reckoning coming first. The morning of the Gallatin County Summer Livestock Exhibition dawned hot and cloudless and gold. By 9 o'clock, the fairgrounds were a churning, dust-hazed carnival of pickup trucks and stock trailers. The smell of kettle corn and diesel and warm animals thick in the air. An auctioneer's voice crackling over tinny speakers, children safe and laughing with ice cream in their fists, darting between the pens while their parents leaned on the rails and traded gossip. 200 ranching families. The whole valley in one field. And at 10 o'clock, in the big open-sided exhibition barn, the county's most respected veterinarian was scheduled to give his annual address on herd health. Gerald Foster took the small stage in a pressed shirt and a bolo tie, silver hair gleaming under the barn lights, and began, in his rich and reassuring voice, to warn the assembled ranchers about the parasite season ravaging the valley. "I know times are hard," he said warmly. "I know the invoices sting. But I promise you, my supplement program is the only proven defense we have. Stay the course. Trust the man who's kept this valley's herds healthy for 31 years. It was a masterpiece of quiet fraud, and the tired, frightened families drank in every word. He never saw her coming." Claire Bennett walked up the center aisle of that barn in clean jeans with Dr. Sullivan's brass-belled stethoscope around her neck. She stepped up onto the stage. She turned to the old veterinarian and asked him, in a voice that carried to every corner of the packed barn, one simple question. "Dr. Foster, will you tell these good people what's actually in their feed?" The silence that fell was absolute. Foster's frozen smile did not waver. "My young associate," he said smoothly, "is overtired and inexperienced. This is neither the time nor the—" And then the first door opened. At the back of the barn, a tall man in a state agency polo shirt stepped from the white sunlight into the shade. "This is the senior forage toxicologist from the State Diagnostic Laboratory," Claire told the crowd. "He drove out this morning. Ask him what he found." The man lifted a folder and read from it in a dry, official voice. Not a parasite. Ragwort contamination. Uniform across a single mill lot. Present only in bags dated after this spring's supplier change. He lowered the page. "Someone milled a toxic weed into your cattle feed." The whispers rose like wind through wheat. Foster's face began, slowly, to lose its color. "The lab is mistaken," he said. "There's been a mix-up in the samples," and then the second door opened. Danny Reyes came up the aisle carrying a plastic tote of labeled feed samples, 29 of them, one from every ranch and every date. Beside him walked 3 ranchers, Hendricks, Olson, and Old Man Pruitt. "She pulled my herd off his feed," Sam Hendricks said, his voice ringing off the tin roof. "No shots, no supplement, just clean hay. 4 days, and my cattle stood up." He turned to face his neighbors. "Foster billed me $11,000 to make them sicker." The murmur became a growl. I knew nothing. Foster's voice cracked for the first time. "Nothing about any contamination. I am a victim of that mill as much as any man here." And then Claire, without raising her voice at all, laid down the last stone. She held up the crumpled quarterly statement in one hand. 22%, she said. "That's your ownership stake in Cordell Feed and Supply, Dr. Foster." She lifted her other hand. "And this is the safety certificate that passed the poisoned lot as clean. It's signed. The signature is yours." She did not shout. She did not gloat. She simply said, into the ringing silence of that barn, a doctor's first duty is to the ones who can't speak for themselves. Some men in this valley forgot that. For money. Then she stepped back and let the paper do the rest. The third door opened. 2 officers from the county sheriff's department, quietly briefed that morning, walked calmly up the aisle. The arrest was procedural, unhurried, almost gentle, a hand on the elbow, a low word. The old veterinarian led out into the white summer light while 200 families he had cheated watched in stunned, absolute silence. Wade Cordell was taken in that same afternoon. The State Veterinary Board suspended Gerald Foster's license within the week, and the fraud investigation that followed unwound 30 years of comfortable lies. In the front row, Margaret Walters, 82 years old, rose slowly to her feet and leaned on her cane. "I have lived 82 years in this valley," she said, in her dry creek bed voice, loud enough for the whole barn to hear. "And it took a girl from New York to remind the whole lot of you that the smallest voice in the room is very often the only honest one." She thumped her cane once on the plank floor. Remember it this time. It was, everyone later agreed, the truest thing said in that barn all day. And then, in the front row, Thomas Walters began to clap. The whole barn followed, 200 families roaring to their feet, and the young doctor they had spent the entire summer writing off stood on the stage in her mentor's stethoscope with a single tear on her cheek and let herself, at last, be seen. In the weeks that followed, the audit confirmed everything. Every rancher Gerald Foster had overbilled was made whole from the seized assets of Cordell Feed and Supply. The contaminated lot was destroyed and the mill was shut down. And the county, which had spent 31 years handing its trust to the wrong man, turned, all at once and rather sheepishly, to the right one. By the time the first cool nights of September crept down off the mountains and the cottonwoods along Silver Creek began to turn, Claire Bennett was the busiest veterinarian in the Gallatin Valley, and she owned the practice outright. She had bought the shuttered clinic for $1 and a promise from the county. She never once mentioned the celebrated career she'd left behind. Though the town discovered it soon enough, in a framed veterinary journal, a proud Danny hung on the waiting room wall the standard forage toxicology protocol authored by Dr. C. Bennett, the very method that had exposed the man who'd underestimated her. Folks would read it and look at her and shake their heads and love her a little more. Danny Reyes never cleaned another stall for wages again. Sit down, Claire told him one morning on the clinic's back step where they'd first shared a sandwich. I've got something to tell you, and you're going to want to be sitting. That's never a good start, Danny said, sitting. I've established a scholarship. The Raymond Sullivan Scholarship for my mentor. Funded out of my own savings. She handed him an envelope. It sends one Gallatin Valley kid to veterinary school. Full tuition. Every cent. And there's a job waiting the day he graduates. Danny opened the envelope. He read it. Then he read it again, and could not speak for a full minute, his freckled face working. There's only one kid it's for, Danny, Claire said softly. There was only ever one. She sat down beside him, the way he once had for her, and let the young man find his voice again in his own time. The low-cost clinic she opened in the old feed store, the Silver Creek Community Animal Fund, she called it, treated the herds of families who could never have afforded Gerald Foster's invoices. And it treated them for what they could pay, and sometimes for a pan of cobbler. Margaret Walters cut the ribbon herself, with the whole town watching. Finest use of a crooked man's building I ever did see, the old woman declared, and snipped the ribbon clean. Over the front desk, on a small brass hook, hung Dr. Raymond Sullivan's brass-belled stethoscope, retired now. A quiet monument to a man who had taught a girl that the animals cannot speak, so the doctor must. And Thomas Walters, at last, kept his side of a joke. On a warm blue evening at the very end of that summer, he drove into Silver Creek in a clean shirt with his hat in his hands, and he found Claire locking up the clinic in the long gold light. I practiced this whole speech on the drive in, he admitted. Forgot every word of it at the county line. Try the short version, Claire said. The short version. Thomas turned his hat in his rough hands. I'm not younger. I never will be. But I've spent 6 years with the lights off in that house, and I do not intend to spend a 7th. He met her eyes. Have dinner with me, Claire. That's it. That's the whole speech. Claire Bennett looked at the weathered, honest, terrified rancher standing in the last light of summer. She reached out and took his rough hand in her steady one, and she said the same thing she'd said in the dust of the corral. Who said no? On Margaret's porch that night there was peach cobbler and cold lemonade and the sound of 2 people laughing. And the old house on the Walters Ranch had every single one of its lights blazing gold against the dark. They were married the following June in the green bowl of the valley under the same jagged blue mountains, with 200 neighbors watching and Danny Reyes, home from his first year of school, standing up beside the groom. Margaret Walters, 83 now and sharp as ever, rose to give the toast. "I have waited a very long time," she said, lifting her glass in a hand mapped with years, "to see that house full again." She looked at the bride. "And I have learned in the evening of a long life that love does not care in the least how many years you have stacked up behind you. It only cares what you did with them, and whether you were brave enough, at the very end, to reach out your hand." She smiled. To the doctor, who never once said no. And here, perhaps, is the thing worth carrying home from a story like this one. We spend so much of our lives, don't we, measuring one another by the wrong yardstick, by youth, by money, by the confidence of a loud voice and a fine silver head of hair. We look at the quiet young woman in the dust, and we see everything she is not, and we miss entirely everything she is. We trust the polished man on the stage because he has always been on the stage, and we forget to ask what he has been doing up there all this time. But time, in the end, is an honest accountant. It sorts the loud from the true. It reveals who was tending the herd and who was only ever tending the bill. If you are young and gifted and underestimated, take heart from this. The world will try to make you smaller, and your only task is to refuse, quietly, and to do the work, and to keep the receipts. And if you are older, as so many of us who tell and hear these stories now are, standing somewhere in the long golden evening of our own long lives, then know this: it is never, ever too late to be brave. It is never too late to reach across a corral fence, to right an old wrong, to open a door and let the truth walk in, to take a good hand in yours and say the words you have been swallowing for 6 years. True worth is never measured by the number of our years, nor by the size of the invoice, nor by who happens to be holding the microphone. It is measured, quietly and forever, by what we did when we thought no one important was watching, and by whether, when the moment finally came, we were kind enough to help, honest enough to speak, and brave enough to say yes. Who said no, indeed, not the ones who matter. Never once the ones who matter.